Safer Sanctuaries, Nurturing Trust Within Faith Communities is a new and comprehensive resource that continues the tradition of Safe Sanctuaries ministry by building on its trusted policies and procedures. To learn more, go to safersanctuaries.org or call 800 972 0433.
Have you ever looked at your church logo and thought, it might be time for a change? Whether that's because your logo screams a decade that is long past, it looks like it was designed by someone's nephew in Microsoft Paint, or your church is heading into a new season in its institutional life and it's a good time to refocus and refresh, then this episode is for you. On this episode of the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast, we welcome back graphic designer and YouTuber Will Paterson to help walk us through the basics of logo design. Thank you to everybody for listening. My name is Dan Wunderlich. I'm a United Methodist pastor. And Will, welcome back.
Hi, good to be back.
Well, Will is a professional graphic designer with his own studio based in the UK. You can find him on YouTube. He has his own subreddit for designers, and he's got a class available on Skillshare. Last month, he shared with us 5 graphic design hacks that he uses in his work, and the bulk of his work is in logo design and branding. So we asked last month, Will, how you got into design, but I would love to start this time by asking you why, out of all the applications of graphic design, why are you drawn to logos?
Oh, that's what's it called when there's loads of worms in a tin? You're opening the tin of worms. So logos are just what people love to work on, I think. And for me, it was kind of like, oh, well, if I'm going to design something for a company, I'd like to design everything. And the best way to have your hand in that is by designing the logo or the brand identity, which is all the other assets surrounding the logo and the feeling of the company. It sort of allows you to dictate what the company feeling is. It shows a lot of obsession, a lot of detail, but it also shows your personality more. So that's why I like logos.
That's awesome. Well, last month, our first design hack was to start with pencil and paper or an Apple Pencil in your iPad to sketch for a bit before jumping into Photoshop and Illustrator. And maybe for some of us, that was an unexpected step because we just blow past that in our work and jump right into the programs. When it comes to logo design and branding, we also have to maybe start a bit earlier on the road, don't we? There are some key steps that have to happen before we even start sketching. So Will, where and how do you start the process?
Oh, okay. So the process is it's quite extensive, but I'll lay it down of how I start. First of all, I'll meet with the client. So obviously for yourself, if you're designing for yourself, just write down what the goals are of the rebrand. Don't just change your logo for no reason. A good reason is to modernize. I see a lot of church logos that need modernizing. And we've done that before in the past with a few others. And essentially you start researching, and researching is looking at other logos and other churches or companies or people that have them that you identify with as a company or as a brand. So that research is looking into the competitors, not saying that churches are competitors, but in this case I'll just call them that. So when you've done that, it will give you a good sense of what's appropriate for that logo. For instance, you won't want Comic Sans in hot pink as the logo for your church, but you might want it as the logo for your kids' playgroup or something, or a nursery kindergarten. So once you've worked that out, from a good basis of what the appropriate style is. The next thing to do is mood boarding. Mood boarding is essentially getting a mood or a visual cues for a mood, and that's taking loads of images. And I use Millernote for this, which is a great whiteboarding app, and it's free. But you take loads of images that have nothing to do with the brand or anything, but spark a feeling and give a sort of mood, whether it's like uplifting, hopeful, angelic, or whether it's dark, sad, old. And you get those images into the mood board. What that does is it sort of creates a more narrow path where you go down in this journey, and it keeps your vision and creative direction correct. So a lot of the time, me as a logo designer nowadays, I don't skip it particularly, but I will draw first. And the reason why is because I've got an idea in my head that needs to get out straight away.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time that won't work, the idea, but it's important to record everything,
Yeah.
so I can sort of free up my brain space and I don't have to worry about forgetting it. So mood board after researching, then you can sketch if you so desire.
Yeah, and you talked about looking around at other organizations in your category. Do you also look around outside of the category? Like, say, you're doing a design for a fast food restaurant. Do you also look at like apparel companies or hospital companies? Like, do you look around in other arenas for sort of what could be a logo version of the mood board, or do you generally like to stick your brain just in that category?
I think for me, I like to stay within that category, and the reason why is, if again, it's about appropriateness. This is one of the principles of logo design, is making
Mm,
it appropriate for the industry or the thing that you're in. So again, if I was to design a church logo for a church and it ended up looking like a hospital logo, then, or if it had like sort of, it's a bit different here in the UK, but
sure.
uh, if you had like a band, they may have like a really crazy stylistic logo. And if I incorporated that in, because for instance, I might just think, we're a hip church, we like
Yeah.
these things, that it would be a mess of creative direction. I think the the main thing with logos is to stick with one direction and
Mm,
do it well, or to explore directions, but don't try to mash them up. And I've got I'm literally recording a video after this, and I have been, about mashing up logos, and it will be a
mm.
great exercise for people to see why we don't mash these different ideals up from different industries.
Yeah. Well, and we talked last month about designing something simple enough for people to remember and draw themselves very quickly. So, in a way, the purpose of the logo is not just to stick in people's mind, but it's to help the target audience understand who you are. So, I guess a part of
Yeah.
what you're saying is when you stay within a category and you can be creative and innovative, but within certain bounds, it actually helps the people who see it understand who you are and what you're about. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think so. It's difficult to explain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially without visuals, but the way that a logo, if you look at Apple's logo, you would never guess that's a tech company,
True.
because they're giving you an idea. So when people ask me, "Oh, that logo," or when a client, I've had this before loads of times, where I give some directions to a client of where we want to go, and they don't agree because it doesn't show about their product. Recently, we had one with a Christian organization where they were saying, well, we want to get something in there about our product or service. And I said, well, it's not about the product or service that you're selling, it's the idea. And Apple,
Right.
they don't have a computer in their logo. They don't have, any tech. They've got this idea of a simple apple, like this awakening. And the reason why they do that is because a lot of these companies, if you take a look now or have a think of a company, chances are their logo looks nothing like what they sell.
Mm,
And that's because what they're selling you obviously is a product, but moreover, they're selling you in a brand identity way, an idea behind that. So when you're thinking about your logo or what's appropriate or not, think about the idea behind it, as in not what you sell or what you do as a church, but the idea of
mm,
church. What do you
mhm.
do there? And that's where you'll find a clever design as well as a good one.
Well, and maybe spelling out that idea is helpful. Some of the videos that you do are your design process, and you'll do a design challenge or even a redesign challenge. And oftentimes you will show us, just for a second, you can pause it and read it, but you'll show us a design brief. And so let's say we've got our research done, we've built our mood board. What sorts of helpful categories should we hone in on or put on a single document to help guide us? What do you generally include in your design brief?
Um, Target customer is a good one for the design brief. So knowing who it's targeted at will restrict you. Again, all a brief does is restrict you from going into the wrong places. So
Mm,
don't think of it as an additive thing. Think of it as a reduction thing. So
mm,
it restricts you. Also, what else do I put in there? Target age range, maybe gender. Gender is a bit different nowadays because a lot of companies, I don't know if it may still be a trend, but a lot of companies nowadays are going for the uni gender or unisex sort of look
sure.
and things, depending on what your company is. Um, in the brief as well, it's good to have adjectives about the brand. So good words that can help you. A lot of the times, if you look at a church logo, if you were to try and put an adjective towards that logo, that is what they wanted you to see in the
Mm,
design. So in a brief, you should always write down like the adjectives of a certain design or what you want to get people to see out of it, and that will help the creative or the designer do just that, because that's our job, is to translate that emotion into a design or something small somehow. And that's where I think people get stuck with their logos. They think it's just terrible, and chances are it is. But if you take the idea, I mean, every logo starts terrible. It depends when you quit
right,
on
right,
the
right, right,
design,
right.
or you've missed a bit of the process, right? Every logo starts terrible, but it's the process between it. It's the journey that makes it happen. So put adjectives of what you want to see in the design. And then when you design it, put them back and see if it matches up. And then that's a good way of getting a feeling, because a logo isn't just a mark, it's a feeling that you're trying to give to people. It's kind of like an insignia, a symbol of a tribe, a symbol of a faction of people, you know? So that's what you want to get to. It's like the face, and the personality of the face is the brand identity surrounding it.
I think that's great, and actually, kind of to jump to another creative field, it falls in line with a technique that there's a stand-up comedian and filmmaker named Mike Birbiglia, and he always says when he's working on a new show or a new movie, he doesn't ask people, "Did you like it?" But he asks people, like, "How did it make you feel?" Or what did you think it was about? And trying to see, are we ending up at the same place? Did they feel what I wanted them to feel? Did they think it's about the same thing I think it's about? And if not, then I've got more work to do. And if so, it doesn't really matter if they like it or not. I mean, it sort of does. But the goal, I guess, is delivering on that feeling and that meaning.
That's right. Yeah, you can't force people to like a logo. A logo, even if you were to
Right.
design the best logo in the world, there will be tons of people who hate it. Do you remember the Instagram one? They changed it, and the whole internet
Yeah.
was up in arms. And then 2 weeks later, they didn't care
Yep.
because it
Absolutely.
worked.
Well, even when they first named the iPad, we had iPod, and then we knew Apple was putting out a tablet, and they called it iPad, and
Yeah.
everyone made terrible jokes for a week, and now everything is an iPad. Even to their chagrin, Microsoft tablets are sometimes called iPads because it's just
Yeah,
become a
people
part of.
call it an iPad. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've researched, we have created a mood board, we've worked up a brief, we've sketched out our initial ideas, but now we're wanting to sit down with a sketchbook. We mentioned last month the value of starting with a sketchbook, and even just doing a brain dump, 20 ideas in 10 minutes or something like that. How do you start the pen to paper process?
And now let's take a brief pause to hear a word from our sponsor. Safer Sanctuaries. Nurturing trust within faith communities is a new and comprehensive resource that continues the tradition of Safe Sanctuaries ministry by building on the trusted policies and procedures that have guided churches over the past 25 years. This resource contains theological grounding for the work of abuse prevention, psychological insights about abuse and abuse prevention, basic guidelines for risk reduction, age-level specific guidance, and step-by-step instructions on how to develop, revise, update, and implement an abuse prevention plan in your church or organization. For Christians, resisting evil and doing justice are ways that we live and serve Jesus Christ. Safer Sanctuaries provides help to do just that by framing this work as a life-giving, community-enhancing, and proactive endeavor. It enables communities to be empowered and flourish as they develop and implement policies and procedures that make everyone safer. To learn more, go to safersanctuaries.org or call 800-972-0433.
And now, back to our program.
Yeah, so I'll write the name. It depends if it's an icon or a logo type. They're two quite different things. A logo type is
Yeah.
basically a word mark, but they take longer. And because I'm sort of a calligraphy man and also a
Yeah.
hand lettering dude, I love logo types. So I'll write the name or I'll write, the idea in actual words. So you can do this pretty well as like a mind map as well. I do teach that as part of the process. Mind mapping gives you connections. So
Yeah.
write the name or whatever at the top of the piece of paper and then start scribbling like any idea. No one's going to see it. So just scribble and be okay with the 99% of bad ideas and have a timer next to you for 10 minutes and try to get 10 good ideas or 20 if you really want to push it. So the way that I do this is I'll think of how the design should be, like based upon where it's going to be seen. For instance, an app icon. So if your church has an app, it might be very important to have a scalable icon that works on the app. So you would give yourself the confines of that. So you would draw a square and then you would start drawing inside it, how it would work. That little square is normally known as the graphic device that is used on most logos. There's always hidden ones in every design. You can't see it because that's the confines of how the logo should be spaced. So just start scribbling. Honestly, it just works. If you put enough pressure on yourself to do it, it works.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you mentioned there too, like thinking of the applications of your logo, and there's so many facets of applying a logo that we maybe don't think of when we start sketching. And so maybe sketching is just brain dump, get out as much as you can. But as we start iterating and moving forward and choosing the ideas to move forward with, like one of the things I think about that I learned a long time ago was like, can it be embroidered well? Or is it too detailed to be embroidered well? Will it work on a small size? The first time I had to put a logo on a pen, that is tiny, a logo wrapping around the side of a pen. And does it work at all sizes? Does it work in one color? You're not always going to be able to afford multiple colors. And it's really cool when you have logos with gradients and shadows and things. But what if you need to print it in one color on the side of a pen? Like what are some of the things that maybe the amateur or learning designer doesn't think about when it comes to logo designs that you have made second nature?
Number one, this is a big one. And every video I seem to be like telling everyone it's the consistency between the space. So if you have like a logo with loads of lines in it, or maybe it's got like a bit missing, for instance, like a negative space one, you want to match up the positive space with the negative space of how thick and thin it is. So if you've got it's very difficult to explain audio only, but essentially, two lines should be thick, and then if you separate those two lines, you want the negative space in between those two lines to be the same space as the thick line. The reason why is when you scale that down, it's the same as grids. So you use a grid with a logo a lot of the time, depending on the style of logo, obviously. But if you scale that down, it looks better when it's consistently spaced. So when we talk about consistency, it's all about the angle, where things end, so where points end, where things are thick and where things are thin. You generally want to have as much consistency as possible because if you think about it, you look at the Apple logo or even my logo, everything is just like copied from each other. Like the Apple logo is, if you sliced it in half, it isn't symmetrical, but it looks like it is because it's got the bite taken out of it, and that bite was taken out by the designer to make it look more like an apple instead of a cherry when it was small. So It's all these. The consistency is the most intricate part of it, and that is the end part. So that's what you finish at the end. You can tell a lot of the designs that I get shown on the subreddit are really good ideas, but they are executed badly at the end. And my sort of goal is to take that and try and make it better at the end, is in take the idea and make it more appropriate, more consistent. And although it could be the slightest tweak, it could be just nudging the anchor points a couple of points, it makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And that's that last little bit of polish that makes it look like someone who knows what they're doing designed it.
Yeah.
And sometimes too, it's not always possible, but talk about the interplay between the icon and the text. Sometimes you'll design a logo that has a logo text and an icon. It's not always possible to get it exact, but you kind of want the weight of the icon and the weight of the text to be fairly similar. Is that correct?
That is right. Yeah. You want the icon to look, if it depends on how the icon is.
Sure.
So you can't do it with the Apple logo. I'll keep using
Right.
that one because it's the one that everyone knows. You
Yeah.
can't really keep that similar. But if you to just have that as a stroke, then you want the stroke thickness to be as close to the thickness of your font that you're using. So a lot of logos are lined. And if you have a lined logo, then it needs to have consistency with the type. Otherwise, it will just look horrendous. And that's probably one of the reasons why people say, I don't know what's wrong with my logo. And it's just because you haven't said, right, this is consistent or this should be consistent. What's the weight of that? How big should this be? Where should it be placed? And it's everything should have. Design is a lot more easier when you realize that everything is just like a copy of another thing on the design.
Yeah.
Like if that's the best way I can explain it without showing it.
Well, sure.
Best
And
way to find out what.
Yeah. Well, even talking about the Apple logo, the bite out of the apple isn't a bunch of individual teeth. It's a curve that's very similar, if not identical, to the curve on the leaf or the stem that's above the apple. And
That's
that
right.
seems to me just another way of making it harmonious with itself.
That's it. Yeah, that logo was same with the Twitter bird. You know, the old one anyway. It was just a bunch of circles. That's why we use the shape builder tool, so you
Yeah.
can create an icon. And to keep things simple, we can use loads of circles. We can, like I said in last month's podcast, you can change the size of these circles to the golden ratio by increasing them by 1.618 or decreasing them. And then you can put them all together to create a cool minimal logo, and chopping bits off. That's how a lot of these really intricate but simple designs are made. It's by using geometric shapes and keeping within a system. And you realize that when you go into font making as well, when you're designing fonts, everything is a component of something else. Like
Mm,
the B is just a backwards D, or
right.
even a backwards P and a backwards Q. And you start to realize that an N is just a U, but backwards as well.
Yeah.
So when we design fonts, it's very similar to logos in some respects. When you design an N, that should be the first letter because it's got all the components that you need for a T, an L, a U, an R, an H, and everything's just copied. And that's what brings consistency to the design.
Well, I just, as a font designer, I want to say you have your first name starts with a W. My last name starts with a W. I hate most W's. So as a type designer, just as a side note, is that one of the harder letters to work with?
No, that's one of the easier ones. It's just two
Oh, okay.
V's. Yeah,
All
the
right.
hardest one is an S.
Oh, yeah.
The S is
That's true.
more difficult. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's say we've got a one color or two color sort of logo that we like, works well in black and white. We've got a great shape. We've got great type. It's unified. The stroke widths are great. The spacing is right. Now it's time to apply some color. And I know you could give us an hour-long lecture on color theory, but what are some basics that you think about when you're choosing and working with colors for a brand? And one of your recent videos, you taught about a color tool that's built in to the design programs we use.
Yeah, so color, there's something called color theory and color psychology. Color theory is how colors sort of interact, what's harmonious and what's not. Inside of Adobe Illustrator, though, if you go to Window and scroll down, you'll see something called Color Guide. Now, what that does is it allows you to, when you select a color in Adobe Illustrator, that's maybe you've already put a red in or a green. It will give you all the harmonious colors with it that you can choose to use around it. And it's done by maths and color theory. Now, the difference between color theory and color psychology is color psychology tells you how people feel with,
Yeah.
colors. And, a stop sign is red, a go is green. That's the simplest color psychology. Black is respected, blue is trusted, and that's why a lot of banks are blue, because during the recession they rebranded to blue to
Mm.
make people feel more trusting towards
Yeah.
banks after the 2008 crash. So it's essentially manipulating people in a good way. Of
Right.
It sounds terrible when you say it like that, but all this is just choosing a color like red invokes passion. It can invoke danger too, depending on what happens. Yellow is more eccentric and orange is more creative. The reason why we have orange is because we're more creative. So if you want to get a quick rundown of what color to use, just type in color psychology online and it'll give you a good idea. Then you can choose which hue and saturation to make it more pastel, more vibrant. YouTube went from a nice red to a very vibrant red because it's on a computer. You never see YouTube printed out. So they
Right.
wanted to really stand out. So they made this P3 color gamut red, which is like ridiculously red. And that's how they work. So color psychology, just type it in on Google, you'll see it. There's a great video from Satori Graphics, which is another YouTuber that has got like loads of color theory if you really want to nerd out on it. But essentially, you've got the color guide websites like Coolers, COOO, Coolers. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. One of the cool things that you do in your YouTube videos and in your presentations to clients is showing them how the logo will work out in the world. And so you'll make mock-ups for products, t-shirts, signage, business cards, ads, social media posts. Number one, why do you do this? And you don't just send them a PNG or, and say, hey, here's the logo. And why might this be a good move for someone who maybe works on their church staff? They're the creative person, they're the designer, the communications person, but they're not the ultimate decision maker. And so they want to help convince their boss or the pastor to entertain a logo redesign. Why might things like these mock-ups be a good thing for a designer to do?
Sure. Mock-ups bridge the gap between fantasy and reality. So instead of spending loads of money on printing the logo onto, for instance, church flyers, branded things like pens or lanyards that you might have in your church, the best way of doing it is just mocking it up. It's generally a lot cheaper. There's a lot of websites like you've got Envato, Elements, Adobe Stock, loads of places where they have mock-ups. The reason why is you don't want to leave the client guessing. You don't want them to
Right.
use their imagination at all, because if you allow them, they're going to think of some crazy things of how the logo is going to work and how it's going to look.
Yeah.
Like they have no idea. One of the biggest fails I've ever had was doing that, was just sticking the logo on a black or white background and saying, there you go. What do you think? And they always hate it because it looks very basic. They don't know how it will work in real life, so they're scared and their walls are up. So if you're presenting to your church leadership or to your client, always show how it's going to be used, show how it will be perceived. And in a church, that could be, mocking up a banner. So take a picture of the outside building, add a sales banner in through, generative fill on
Yeah.
Adobe Photoshop's new beta thing, which is very easy to use, and then just put the logo in. The reason why is you're stopping them from like getting away with their thoughts and thinking this logo sucks or this logo doesn't work.
Yeah.
So every time you create a logo, the most transformative and the most exciting part is the mock-up stage, because you've got to remember the person that you're designing it for doesn't know how it will look in the end. You do.
Right.
You're the only one. So you've got to convince them by providing evidence of how it works. And it's also a really good exercise to show you if the logo will work or not by putting an idea of the logo onto a mock-up.
Well, let's say, Oh, happy day. They approve the logo, whether it's for the church or your client. Will, someone has said, yep, that's it, man. You knocked it out of the park. Let's run with it. Now it is time to turn over that logo. And now it's time to use that logo. Maybe it's time to hand it over to people who aren't as skilled in graphic design and programs as you are. What are some of the very basic guidelines to give people around how to use a logo? What sorts of file types should we be making? Are there any checklists out there, plugins out there that can help with this kind of thing?
Yeah, there's quite a few. So it's called, we call it a mini brand guidelines, which is basically a logo's do and don't. And it's a little PDF. Most companies you'll see will have brand guidelines. So you can just type in starbucks.com guidelines and it will show you a really cool interactive website of what they say you should and shouldn't do for your logo. Obviously for your church it's slightly different. So what you do is once you finish the logo, you can either save it as a PNG or you can save it as a vector file, or you could go to a place called the logopackage.com, which is a little plugin that you can buy, which essentially it's revolutionary, really. It saved me hours and hours of time. It takes your logo and exports it for you and does everything you need to in loads of different file formats like PNG, SVG, ESP, and saves it to your hard drive for the client. And it's really nice and easy to give to them. So
Yeah.
the other thing to do is this about exporting? I've sort of lost my train of thought.
Yeah. So when you hand over
My
a logo, you're wanting to like outline the text probably so that they don't necessarily have to have the right font, or like what kind of little
Oh yeah,
things do you do to prep a file?
yeah. So as you say, yeah, outlining text. I don't know how I missed that one. Yeah, you've got to outline your text. That should have been outlined ages ago, because you need to fix it most of the time, depending on what kind of logo you're working on. So outline your text. Make sure that when you save it, it's saved as an Illustrator file and as an SVG file. Save a few PNGs. That just makes it transparent so people can shove it into Pro Presenter or to shove it into another program that you use to present
Yeah.
the logo or to other designers. And to create a logo's do and don'ts. We've got something called the brand guidelines on a website that we've made called Assets 4D, which is like assets for designers at good prices. We created this sort of template for this, but it's completely customizable. And I'm not trying to sell it to you. You can do it yourself. Just keep that in mind. So it allows you to put your logo in and it will tell someone what not to do to that design
Yeah.
and you can customize it. So that is how far away should it be spaced on a 1920 by 1080 thumbnail on your church website or on the masthead? Should it be pasted at the bottom corner, at the top corner? What colors can you use? Can you use bright blue? No. So it's basically telling anyone else who's never seen the design what not to do and what to do to the logo. And that brings brand continuity.
That's great. And you are not here to sell things, but I have looked at that and it is very reasonably priced and it looks super helpful. So make sure folks check out Will's site and his YouTube channel, and he's got links to different things that he uses. Well, Will, we like to end by asking all of our guests if they could just share a word of encouragement for our listeners as they do this hard work of communications and design. These are folks who are often either volunteers or they're doing multiple jobs or they're not being paid probably as much as they could be or should be, but they are doing this work because they want to make a difference in the world. What words of encouragement do you have for the folks who are booting up Photoshop every Monday morning and saying, okay, here we go?
Um, Great design is hidden, and anything that you're doing might not be recognized by the leadership or even the congregation, but you could be rest assured knowing secretly that you're the reason why people are reading and watching things really well. So take encouragement in the fact that without your skills, without you spending a ridiculous amount of time getting things right, that although people are taking it for granted, it wouldn't work the same. So take heart in that. And
Mm.
I see you, I see what you're doing, and every other designer and creative does as well. But the fact that people don't see it and applaud you all the time means that you're doing a heck of a good job.
Awesome. Well, Will, thank you so much for joining us again, and being our teacher this summer. If folks want to follow your work or connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Sure, just type in my name on YouTube. You'll see my mugshot of myself on the thumbnail somewhere, or you can just go to my website, willpaterson.design.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Will. We really appreciate it.
So thank you.
And now, listeners, we want to hear from you. Which of these steps or tips really connected with you? If you have or are currently rebranding your organization, how's it going? Email us at podcast@umcom.org. We just might share your thoughts or stories on a future episode. And you can, of course, use that email, podcast@umcom.org, to send us any feedback or topic suggestions you have for the show. We always love hearing from you. And as always, the easiest way to support the show and help other church communicators like yourself find it is by sharing this episode with your friends and colleagues, and by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to us right now. And did you know that United Methodist Communications has celebrated over 80 years of ministry? Your support ensures that the latest denominational news, dynamic stories, and informative articles will continue to connect our global community. Make a tax-deductible donation today at resourceumc.org/giveumcom. Thanks again for listening to the MyCom Church Marketing Podcast.
Safer Sanctuaries, Nurturing Trust Within Faith Communities is a new and comprehensive resource that continues the tradition of Safe Sanctuaries ministry by building on its trusted policies and procedures. This resource contains theological grounding for the work of abuse prevention, basic guidelines for risk reduction, age-level specific guidance, and step-by-step instructions on how to develop, revise, update, and implement an abuse prevention plan.